Today has been very interesting. We decided a few months ago to run candidates, not because we want to get into the White House. We know that that house is built on slavery and we want nothing to do with it. We enter into the elections because, as we all know, election years are always this giant vacuum that sucks out all the energy, and all you hear about in the media is the elections. This year, of course, is extremely unprecedented in some ways, with the rise of the racist, vulgar, crass Donald Trump, who has dominated the airwaves. And then, of course, unprecedented also because of what's happening below with the Sanders momentum, you know, the Occupy Wall Street youth that are really coming forward because of the economic crisis. And of course, Hillary Clinton, who we consider very much an establishment candidate, a warmonger. As one of the activists described her, she's Walmart, Wall Street, and war. And of course, and so our view is, of course, you need to struggle, that the only time that there's real change in this country is when there's a movement from below. And it doesn't matter who's in the White House, it matters who's in the streets. And this year, we decided, after much consideration, to run two black candidates. And we ran two black candidates because it was so important to recognize the horrible attacks that the black community is facing in this period. And of course, not just in this period. It's not just unbridled police terror. It's really the legacy of slavery, that still continues to this day. We had someone speaking last night on the legacy of Ho Chi Minh, and they reminded us that Ho Chi Minh made the comment that the most oppressed people in the world are the black people. And it was a reminder of the importance of paying tribute and recognizing this important struggle. And so even though we recognize the importance of the Latino struggle, even though immigrants are being deported in record numbers, it was important, you know, for us to have two black candidates. And after spending the day at the Left Forum, I'm even more reminded about how important this is. Now, Scott and I have gone to several of the Socialist Alternative and the ISO kinds of meetings that are taking place, and they're addressing, and they're actually having very interesting discussions. And at first it was sort of like, I am so annoyed, you know, but then later, after you see, you know, how important this is, really Workers' World Party should not be out of this discussion, because we have so much to contribute. And one of the things that is so annoying for me as a Latina who was formed during the national liberation struggles of the 70s, you know, when Che and the Young Lords Party and the Brown Beret movements was at a strong, this is when I was shaped politically. It's very annoying for me to go into a room where they're discussing such important issues like the elections or important issues like the political movement, and it's all white, or primarily all white, and primarily white men. That to me is very annoying, you know. So you have to kind of like chill and, you know, sort of hear what's going on and recognize that nonetheless it's an important debate that the left is having, and we don't want to be out of this debate. And we want to show that, in fact, you know, the Bernie Sanders movement has something from below, but it's not going to go far. The people who are fighting on this issue, the people that are involved because of the economic crisis, must learn the importance of solidarity with the oppressed, because no movement can survive without understanding that. You can't win liberation, you can't win emancipation unless you understand that. You can't. Women will not be liberated. Workers will not be liberated until we have solidarity with the oppressed. And so this is the decision that we made to run two black candidates, and why it's important for our party to enter into the debate about where the movement goes in the coming period. And we want to reach out to all those that are supporting Sanders from a left perspective, from an anti-Wall Street perspective, but we also want to talk about the other issues and point out that, Sanders is still a member of the Democratic Party, and he's strengthening the Democratic Party, even if they're strengthening it from the left, even though he may want to bring a more left program. Where is it all going to end? And all we have to see is what has been happening to the Democratic Party in the recent period. So what's going on here is very important, and I feel very strongly that the three folks here have a lot to contribute to this debate, and so I'm going to turn it over to them, and they'll make short presentations, and then we will have Q&A and comments from everyone here. So I'm going to turn it over to Comrade Lamont first.
I don't think you can talk about the current movement of national rebellion, uprisings, and actions, right, without giving some just due and some props and respect to Brother Malcolm X, who has really been a really big influence to the current thread and to the current movement. So we wanted to give him a brief tribute and then kind of go into some of the issues and layers of our campaign. Thursday, May 19th, was the 91st birthday of Brother Minister El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Brother Malcolm X. He was born May 19th, 1925. Brutally assassinated in the Audubon Ballroom, February 21st, 1965. And I think that as we're also lifting up his name, he would also want us to lift up the names of Yuri Kochiyama, Lorena Hansberry, and also Ho Chi Minh. I think that Malcolm, who was evolving in 1964 and 1965, would want us to recognize their contributions to the collective struggle. This was the same Malcolm who said, "I, for one, will join with anyone. I don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change these miserable conditions." Unfortunately, we're actually still living those same conditions 50 years later. Racism, Jim Crow legal practices, as someone mentioned earlier, mass incarcerations, police murders of black men, black women, black children, poor housing, and third-class living conditions. We all can kind of hearken the name of Emmett Till, but Tamir Rice is really the same act as Emmett Till 50 years ago. We're addressing the same poverty, the same police state, the same imperialism. These are all the same issues. And these are all the same issues that we're addressing with our campaign in this 10-point program. Thankfully, Brother Malcolm X did leave a blueprint for the next generation. A blueprint, though, that will be constructed through work, through hard work, and through struggle. And I think that's the time that we're living in right now, a renewed sense of struggle, a renewed sense of press, of resistance. Young people have stepped up nationwide. Teenagers, right? 20, 21 years old. As the state has clamped down and decent employment has dried up, as the conditions have worsened in the South, the Ku Klux Klan is back recruiting. As we see the Trump campaign nationally galvanizing white supremacists, the youth have sought an old friend, an old elder in the form of Malcolm X. The youth in Ferguson, the youth in Baltimore, the youth in Palestine. Black girls, black boys are now rediscovering Malcolm X for the first time, again, 50 years later, 2015, 2016. I think the reasons that Malcolm has reemerged are multifaceted. Not only was Malcolm ahead of his time regarding the role of women in struggle, but also Malcolm was thinking and traveling and organizing internationally in the 60s, long before social media or the internet. Today we have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, which are tools that our Palestinian comrades actually use to assist us in Ferguson and Baltimore, right? Malcolm didn't have that, but he did also organize a very similar network. Cuba, Ghana, Egypt, Algeria, friends and allies that he could depend on. Interestingly, when I was in Lebanon, I was there in February 2015 with Sarah and also Ramsey Clark and Cynthia McKinney. And I was able to give a presentation on what was going on in the U.S. There. Unfortunately, I was the only black person there in the room who could actually speak on these issues and these developments. And what I really noticed, it was very, very interesting how the youth from Algeria and the youth from Tunisia were really gravitating toward the presentation that I was able to kind of offer and give. And they really grasped a hold to the presence of Malcolm and his influence and his imprints. And I realized at that very moment that Malcolm was a bridge internationally, not only for black folk here in the U.S., but oppressed people internationally, globally. When Malcolm stated in 1964 that it is incorrect to classify the revolt of the Negro as simply a racial conflict of black against white, or as a purely American problem. Rather, we are seeing today a global rebellion of the oppressed against the oppressor, the exploited against the exploiter. I think the youth then really took note to that, and it's very obvious that youth today are taking note again on Malcolm X. There's another recent phenomenon that Malcolm X has inspired, and are any of you on Twitter? Twitter, maybe? No? Okay. Facebook? There's this new emphasis on things that are black. And, I have to just share this because it's a part of the struggle. It's part of the movement. Last year, we were in Cleveland, and there were brothers and sisters there from all over the country, and everybody there was very black and proud. And not the kind of proud that's very arrogant or conceited, but the proud that makes you fight back. Black youth today are now rocking the locks again, rocking their natural hair, rocking their twists, their cornrows. Sisters are wearing their low cuts. And I think this is a very important shift, a very important mental shift, a very important political shift. And there's no question that Malcolm had a lot to do with this shift. Some people think it's not important that you love yourself, that you take pride in who you are, right? That you really embrace the essence of who you are. But I think what Malcolm was saying was that if you do not do those things first, you can't be a freedom fighter. How can you be a freedom fighter if you don't love yourself, if you don't love your cause, if you don't love your people in your community? You have to love yourself and love your people, and then you have a cause to fight for. A worthy cause, a noble cause, a righteous cause that will make you sacrifice for the next generation, out of love, out of pride, out of solidarity. We learned that from Brother Malcolm. I think getting back to that sense of pride, right? The pride that makes you shut shit down, like Sister Erica in Philadelphia. The pride that makes you resist and hold your head high despite the tear gas that we received in Baltimore, despite the tanks in Ferguson, despite the National Guard in Oakland, right? It was Malcolm who gave us that. And the young people today have definitely taken that essence and run with it. COINTELPRO thought they had killed Malcolm, but the youth today have certainly kind of taken this and kept him alive and reignited this sense of struggle, of struggle. In the words of El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. And our deeds, the proper value and respect for time, determine success or failure. I think we're still learning, Malcolm. We're still digging. I have to give Beyonce some props for just, putting Malcolm on the last album. Anyone heard Lemonade? No? Yes? I'm surprised that you backed her, brother. You said no. Okay. Yes. But yeah, she actually, we see Malcolm now back in the classroom, back on the grassroots, and also kind of back in the cultural scene. So I think it's a good thing. And I just hope that we can kind of take this and build and go further with it. And as we are running two black candidates, I think we see Malcolm reflected even in our campaign. So thank you. Power to the people, certainly, and we'll kind of hear from our other panelists as well.
8 years ago, an historic event happened for the first time in the United States. And that event was the election of the first black president, Barack Obama. An event that caused unprecedented euphoria for millions of black people and young people. Now, Obama was not a revolutionary. He wasn't even a radical. He wasn't even a civil rights activist. Obama came up the ranks of the Democratic Party machinery, meaning that he was groomed to become the most powerful imperialist representative, doing the bidding of Wall Street and the Pentagon. The same can be said of Hillary Clinton, who is even more of a pro-establishment figure within Wall Street and the U.S. military, especially since she once held the most powerful position of Secretary of State during the periods of the overthrow of the sovereign states of Libya and Honduras. Even some of the Republicans are threatening to cross party lines, or at least discussing it, to vote for Clinton rather than Trump. And why not? There is really no fundamental differences between the Democrats and Republicans. Both parties owe their allegiances to big business by any means necessary, to coin our brother Malcolm X, including war and occupation. The only difference is that Trump's is really Trump's extreme offensive rhetoric when it comes to immigrants and to women. But to this day, who could have predicted the kind of impact that Bernie Sanders, a 76-year-old Jewish, self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist, would have on these elections? His anti-Wall Street liberal agenda has excited the left movement and the masses in the millions. A recent poll, I think it was the Washington Post or the New York Times, that stated at least 3/4 of the people that they polled see themselves not only as anti-capitalist, but showing great interest in socialism. And that is really good. That is a good, development, a great development. And it's pretty extraordinary considering the fact that for decades, the U.S. has been the most virulent anti-communist country in the world. People have lost their livelihoods if they even dare to show any kind of sympathy with Cuba or the former Soviet Union or any socialist ideas. And many Sanders supporters, as Teresa pointed out, come out of the Occupy movement 5 years ago, which was also repressed by the cops. And these were disinfected, well-educated young whites who began to see that there is no future in capitalism. And for, I think, the first time in history, the AFL-CIO has not endorsed a Democratic candidate, which is certainly a setback for the Clinton campaign, because so many rank-and-file members are supporting Sanders or want to go independent. So the Sanders campaign has made these elections no business as usual, causing an internal crisis within the upper echelons of the Democratic Party. There is no doubt that the Sanders campaign has made the word socialist less taboo and more popular amongst the masses, really since the collapse of the socialist camp 25 years ago. But the flip side of this equation, is Sanders really a socialist? Is he for a revolutionary transformation of society where the workers, regardless of their nationality, where they live, or their skills, take over the reins of society from profit-hungry bosses to run production to meet the needs of the people? Is Sanders for the national liberation of oppressed peoples in Palestine or Puerto Rico, throughout Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia? Is Sanders for disarming the police, ICE, and other repressive forces that kill, maim, and mass incarcerate Black, brown, and indigenous youth, 99% without impunity? We say no. In our view, some of his domestic programs may come off as sounding socialist, but in reality, Sanders is an imperialist when it comes to foreign policy, with a softer, kinder rhetoric compared to Clinton. Sanders supports Israel's right to exist, though he has said some things sympathetic to the Palestinians. He also came out in support of the bombing of Yugoslavia in the late 1990s. He has attacked the Cuban Socialist Revolution in a backhanded way by attacking its leadership. And he recently stated his support for ongoing U.S. drone attacks. In terms of domestic policy, Sanders models himself as a modern-day version of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, whose administration passed the New Deal during the 1930s not to stop the suffering, the massive suffering of millions of people in this country, but really to save capitalism from the potential of a socialist revolution. Roosevelt had to convince the ruling class that the only way to stave off a revolution was to create social reform, such as a massive jobs program, along with a social safety net in the form of Social Security and unemployment benefits. The New Deal did not usher in socialism. This legislation was a culmination of capitalist reforms to placate the jobless and hungry masses who, because they were becoming more and more desperate due to their dire living circumstances, were also becoming more radicalized. Sanders is calling for free education in state colleges by regulating the profits of Wall Street and big business through taxation and other legal means. But no amount of legal legislation that Sanders is projecting will fully eradicate widespread inherent corruption and massive wage theft, because the whole system of capitalism is criminal. The recognition of the struggle against racism and white supremacy has been a big weakness for the Sanders campaign, a weakness that has been taken note by even Sanders supporters. An article that appeared in Counterpunch, like last month, I believe, called "Why Sanders Can't Win the Support of People of Color," was written by a Sanders supporter, Alfredo Lopez, who is Latino, and he states that Sanders probably lost his chance for the Democratic Party nomination due to this weakness, especially where Black people are concerned. And he cited 4 areas that Sanders didn't give proper attention to, including Black Lives Matter, the demand for reparations, resegregation, and the crumbling of urban centers. And to a lesser degree, he states that Sanders raises immigration in a semi-progressive way. Sanders' first instinct was to marginalize the issue of racism. This is a mistake that many on the left make, and they are weaker for it. And our movement is weaker for it. This is why the struggle against white supremacy is synonymous to the struggle, the class struggle, especially inside the US, as far as our organization is concerned. The Trump campaign, which is based on racism and neo-fascistic appeal to angry white workers, is a serious danger. But this danger is evoking resistance with Black and brown activists and anti-racist white allies, disrupting Trump events and shutting them down. They are showing us all how you fight a racist threat. You don't stop racism by voting for the Democrats. You do it by shutting down racism by any means necessary to show that white supremacy has no right to free speech. And we say that Black Lives Matter is a working class struggle. Why? Because the intensification of racist police killings and mass incarceration is in large part a consequence of the global capitalist crisis. High-tech, globalized capital has no jobs and therefore no use for young Black people to become productive. So the attitude of the corporate bosses is to put young Black and brown people in jail or kill them. And this is why we say stop the genocidal war against Black youth along with brown and indigenous youth. The bottom line, sisters and brothers, is Sanders is only for making cosmetic changes to the Democratic Party, which, like the Republican Party, represents capitalism instead of leading people away in an independent revolutionary direction. With all this said, as a revolutionary party whose main priority is to do everything we can to strengthen the revolutionary movement, we will take interest in what will happen at the Democratic Convention and afterwards, once Clinton gets the nomination. How will Sanders respond? How will the movement that supports Sanders respond? Some Sanders supporters are urging him to break with the Democratic Party and run as an independent. Will he run a national write-in campaign where he will certainly get millions of votes that way? These questions and more beg answers. We do know for sure that how people respond in the streets during the RNC in Cleveland, the DNC in Philadelphia, and after November 8th will be decisive in how to move the revolutionary struggle for socialism one step closer to reality. And this is way more important than any bogus elections. Thank you.
Philadelphia this summer, July 25th through 28th. It is going to be like one of the hugest events in the country. Right now, I think they're estimated up to spending about anywhere from $43 to about $50 million for this event, and most of that money is going to be into defense agencies on the ground, ways to keep the people out of having their needs or their concerns addressed for the Democratic National Convention. Right now, there are some groups out there that are working with some of the agencies and local governments to allow space for people's right to protest and people's right to convene. Right now in Philadelphia, there are so many groups that are planning to merge onto the city. It's ridiculous. But the issue around permits and an issue. The only permits so far that has been allotted, I believe anywhere from 4 to 5, has been to Bernie Sanders supporters. They have gotten the bulk of permits so far. And then the only other permits that have been allowed were to groups that are dealing with environmental justice, and then of course those who are also supporting Hillary Clinton. So myself, as a Black woman of color, I specifically feel as though this is the time for marginalized communities, disenfranchised communities to come out to Philadelphia and voice their opinions, because we no longer can afford to pick the lesser of two evils when it comes to voting for the Democratic Party. And we must also remember that the Democratic Party was once the Republican Party as well. That's where they were birthed out of. So, and it's almost, we need to start having the conversation around withdrawing the Black and brown vote from the party. We can no longer afford to deal with the issues around capitalism, wages, slave wages, which is through the prison industrial complex. We can no longer sit back and watch our communities be under police occupation, militarization. We can no longer see our public schools go underfunded. We can no longer deal with the issues around poverty. We must begin the whole process of withdrawing from the electoral process altogether. When we think about Trump versus Hillary or Bernie Sanders, we're literally talking about fascism versus imperialism. And so we hear Donald Trump talking about building a wall, right, and getting the Mexicans to pay for it. But if they were to actually build a wall, that means they would have to spread from half of the Midwest all the way to California, right? And that means returning the land back to the original people. And so at this point, we can no longer deal with the issues around white supremacy, We can no longer sit back and let this rhetoric take place, as well as like get in the White House for the most part. But we have to unite along the lines, especially with the people of color in the most oppressed communities, and then stand up to this government. And then not only that, we have to address the issues of the documents that allow this government to function the way that it is. I think as revolutionaries, like we talk about like social justice issues, and like we're in a time where we can no longer talk about reforming or conforming to a capitalist, racist social structure. We can no longer have those conversations. It's either abolish the systems that are in place and create a new one. That's what like socialism and democracy is. And addressing the issues around like once your government fails you, that we literally do have a right to form a new government. And so like that to me is what like real socialism should look like. The ability to have all the means that are needed to have an essential part of life. That means food, clothing, housing, shelter. We should not be struggling for these things as a society. But specific to Philadelphia, is one of the largest, the fourth or the fifth largest cities in the country, yet we have one of the highest poverty rates in the country. We are literally watching like our Black and brown communities be gentrified, where Black people are being displaced and pushed out, and Black history is being erased. And we see this in Chicago. We see this all over the country, where gentrification and development is pushing people out of their homes and into the streets. But we also see that they're taking funds away from nonprofit organizations where a lot of people get some aid from, and they're putting the money into prison expansions, for the most part. And so, Monica and Lamont has already said a lot about like the electoral process, but this is a significant time in our history. This is history being made. We have to. Bernie Sanders is not a candidate. He also signed the bill in 1998 to go after Assad Shakur. He also signed some of the bills or to wage wars against like Iraq and Iran. Like Hillary Clinton, we already know she's an imperialist. It doesn't matter who gets into the White House. Wars needs to be waged, and 9 times out of 10, if not all wars that are waged through presidency, is on people of color, domestically and internationally. This is how the government actually gets its money and is funded through wars, for the most part, if not entirely. So it's time to address the issues of how poverty, crime, punishment, war, all of these things is a big business and a corporation. They're all designed to keep money in the big pockets. I don't want to say 1%, because Bernie Sanders threw that in the hole. But, I mean, it's the truth, though. This is what, keeps the 1% funded and the 99% at the bottom for the most part. So I hope folks are organizing to come to the DNC in Philadelphia, and I hope to see like a large contingency of people there ready to address the issues of this government, ready to denounce ourselves from this government, ready to like orchestrate or form a new government and to like address the issues that neither one of these candidates are really dealing or addressing with. And we know that neither one of them will actually uphold the laws of the people or the rights of the people. But I think the DNC is something that we all should be moving towards to have our issues addressed on a larger scale and unify our struggles against party and class lines. Right now, I have a flyer. We have several flyers right here for the event that's taken. This is specifically for a Black and people of color march in Philly. And because this march is specifically important. I'm talking way too fast, right? But because like I've been a part of like so many or different organizing groups in Philly right now, and most of them are white folks for the most part. And so I felt it was important for us to organize this march specifically because like the Occupy movement, we can't afford for it to become whitewashed, because we know like even sometimes in like what's considered to be like socialist or leftist groups, they don't deal with the issues around racism, structural racism, systemic racism. I mean, in Philly, we literally had to form a people of color space during the Occupy movement because they were quoting like people like Thomas Jefferson, and like it was like so weird and so crazy. So it's important for us, especially like the disenfranchised community, to claim our space in the DNC. And so right now we're working on building a people's platform around racial and economic justice. But the other group that I'm with, the Philly Coalition for Real Justice, we're actually beginning the process of writing our own Declaration of Independence, rewriting the Constitution to include those who were not included in it, a black Constitution, whatever. We're now challenging what society or what some form of government, universal government, will look like for us from our perspectives, and and so forth. And so, like, what's needed, folks who can bring folks to it, folks who want to do the work, whether it's in Philly or outside of Philly from a different state or whatever. If you want to participate in organizing some folks to come into the city, or if you want to be a part of some of the working groups, I can give you that information, and you can become a part of it that way. If you want to help build the policy and the platform around what racial and economic justice will look like, you are more than welcome to do that too and participate in that.
Is there a list that people can sign to know about the meetings that are going on in Philly?
What can happen is that they go to the website, not the Facebook page, Philly Coalition for Real Justice. You'll see some dates and things like that are put up. Our next meeting is actually going to be on the 23rd in Philadelphia. So if you want to know the of May, this Monday. So if you want to know the outcomes of that, you could definitely let me know, hit me up, and we'll keep you posted if you want to build capacity to come into Philly, or if you want to work with it. We're not saying we're going to smash one form of oppression only to hit you with another form of oppression. Whereas though we see that with Hillary Clinton, she now all of a sudden is against police brutality, but she's also in support of the death penalty. And that is a contradiction in itself. You can't be against police terrorism while also sentencing people to life for police or terrorism behind prison walls. We're also not into profit from corporations. This campaign does not take donations or is not sponsored by major corporations. Whereas the Democratic Party, they are funded. Primarily, Hillary Clinton is funded by the big banks on Wall Street or whatnot. So I will also say that's a bonus, as well as being organizers. None of these folks are organizers, including the Green Party, like you said. Where are they during this whole uprising of the Black Lives Matter movement, for the most part? But yeah, these are organizers first and people liberators second, and so they're not trying to sell you wolf tickets for the most part. You know what I mean? They're actually for liberation and social justice.
About what these elections are and aren't, because every day we're seeing examples of people, especially workers, who are taking a stand because of what's going on with the shutdowns of Trump. I don't know how many people know about this young woman at Home Depot. Did you hear about her? She wore a cap to work that said America was never great. Because that's what Trump has been proclaiming. We have to make America great again. This young black woman, and she wore it to work, and she has, gotten death threats, and and being threatened with being fired from her job. But she says, I'm gonna keep wearing it because I have a right to free speech. Because she said America was never great, and then she went on to point out the racism and so forth. And she said she's gonna keep wearing the hat. Now, we need to defend her. We need to defend her, see how we can support her. But this goes to show people are not waiting for these elections to fight back in their own way, whether individually, as a group or whatever, but it's because of the struggle from below that this young woman and the people who the hunger strikers to demand the firing. Now this got the San Francisco chief of police after Mario Woods was slaughtered, and this young black woman was slaughtered by the San Francisco police just a few days ago, sitting in a car, So people are feeling very emboldened. They're not waiting for the elections to keep fighting back. And I tell you, if Trump gets elected, again, that is a danger. But think of the revolutionary, perspective on that. More and more people are going to be in the streets and fighting back. So I'm sure the ruling class is also very worried about that. That's why they're worrying about worried about somebody like Trump. Not that they don't think the same way he thinks, because they do. They really do. They wouldn't say it the way he says it, but they really do think the same things that he does, in which they can get away with it. But, they want some capitalist peace too, in terms of carrying out their program of cutbacks and so forth. But, just think of the revolutionary upheaval that would happen in this country if somebody like Trump got elected. That's the optimism, not to diminish the dangers.
Talking a little bit about what the question that Amanifu raised about the RNC, about Trump, because waiting for an election and thinking is going to defeat Trump, I think we have to do everything that's possible in the streets. That the idea of saying shut down Trump and the RNC is what it's all about. And how do we make and strengthen the people's movement that's been acting across the country and has disrupted one event after another? That has to be the national climate that is like a real fight back that is just exuding everywhere. Now, both the RNC and the DNC every 4 years attract thousands and tens of thousands of people. They're real convergence. I mean, of course, there's all the delegates and the media and all that. That's about 50,000 people that come to Philadelphia or come to Cleveland. Huge number. Corporate sponsors, lobbyists, all the money people who come, and the politicians. But also thousands and tens of thousands of people opposed come. And how do we form a real expression with them? And this year, it's more complicated than any year I know of ever. Think about the RNC. Now, Ohio is an open carry state for white racists, not for 12-year-old Tamir Rice with a plastic gun. No, he shot dead. John Crawford, right. Walmart's, I mean, you could really, but the Klan operates openly on the streets. They carry their guns, and they have announced that they're coming armed. So are we going to allow that to be an intimidation? No, there are many thousands of people that say, we're going to come out and oppose Trump. But it's a difficult situation, and it's a serious situation. We want to take it seriously. We don't want to be cowed and pushed back by that. We want it to everywhere in the media, in the struggle that we can to make this an even more militant struggle. It's because we don't want to use, there's lots of Democrats that are coming to oppose Trump, to say you should all stampede to Hillary and to the Democrats in order to defeat Trump. And you can do it by having some nice indoor rallies and some conferences and whatnot, but they want to take it really out of the streets. So that is what is making the RNC protests a complicated situation to unthread and to build unity with all these different forces, to support all the different activities, but to try to be with the people who are calling demonstrations in the streets. There's one called on Sunday, right from a people's convention that'll be going down to the RNC and to City Hall. And the reason to go to City Hall, not just to the RNC, is Cleveland has got to be one of the worst cities in the country for police murders. And there was even a restraint put on them by the federal government on the equipment they could order. But anything that they get, including tanks and helicopters, anything they get for the RNC, the police department gets to keep. So we want to really make this an issue of police murders. Now, just to say also, the DNC is explosive in another way. Here's thousands, tens of thousands of people coming to Philadelphia who may well, we don't know what kind of explosion will happen in the streets in terms of even the Sanders forces, who are coming with expectations, and they're up against a machine who has no interest, maybe the Democratic Party, but no interest in democracy, from super delegates to all the rules and all of that. So you have, within a week of each other, two conventions that are politically complicated, explosive, and where can the people's movement push through with real slogans that unite and are a show of force. And that's why we're going to both. And the forces in Cleveland, it's a Midwest mobilization, but they're people coming from New York, coming from the East Coast, who are determined to really help it on the ground. And our campaign is going to be there. There's a big meeting that's also planned in Cleveland on the night the convention opens, where I think Monica and Lamont will both be there, but it's at a Black community center, which has been in the forefront of the Black Lives Matter movement. So that's why it's based there, and that's why our campaign is really there.
What makes Monica and myself and our party distinct from other tendencies is that not only do we identify as revolutionaries on paper, right? But we're fucking organizers. We're grassroots soldiers, and we've been that for years. For years. We're not revolutionary intellectuals, who just spend our time theorizing. We actually put our theory into practice, and we've been doing it for years on the ground. With the oppressed, with the marginalized, as organizers, as leaders in our communities, in the streets. This sister beside me, in Baltimore, in Ferguson. And I think that experience, that real, tangible, living existence of what we breathe, I think that really makes us kind of different from some of the other tendencies. And I don't know Jill Stein personally. I don't. But I was in Baltimore for a month and a half. I never saw Jill Stein in Baltimore. I never saw Jill Stein in Ferguson. I was there twice. So, and Monica was there twice. And we were actually talking with the youth and organizing and listening, right? Not just being political figures, but actually ingrained within the revolutionary struggle. Again, putting that theory into practice. And I think that's the challenge. That has to be a challenge for all of those who identify as socialists, to begin putting your theory into a living practice. And I think that's what the Black Lives Matter movement in this moment, in this period, has challenged a lot of the left to do. Put your words into action. We want to see it. And damn it, we're living it.
We understand what this system is and how devastating and how criminal it is and how it has to be abolished. And that's one of our themes. That's one of our themes. I don't know if you got our literature, but it says abolish capitalism. It says Black Lives Matter. It says disarm the police and ICE, and build for socialism, for revolutionary socialism. And so whenever these elections roll around, we as revolutionary socialists, we don't want to abandon any arena of struggle. And the elections is an arena of struggle, because what it does is that it, as Teresa said, it just sucks the life out of the struggle, or tries to suck the life out of the struggle whenever it can. And then also the continuation of the brainwashing of our class, that the only change will come is if you vote for a Democrat or Republican. And we know, and fundamentally, there are some differences here and there, as, I'm sorry, my brother here, Amanifu, pointed out, there are differences, and we don't want to ignore those differences. But fundamentally, there's no difference between, the capitalist parties. But our class is still chained to them, those parties. And we have an obligation to try our best to unchain, our party from this, from this brainwashing. And so for us, and this is my third time running for president, what I found running for president is that people take you more seriously if you are running for some type of office. That's just the truth. We would rather not be a part of these elections. That's the last thing we want to do. But as Teresa said, we don't want to be, you know, you know, disconnected from our class because of these elections. And so we want to speak to them. We want to bring our program to them. We get opportunities to go into classrooms, to forums like this, in house meetings, to talk to people about why this system does not work and what it's going to take to change this system. And so, and it's through the struggle, it's through being in the streets. And yes, you know, these elections are a danger for our class because of the Trumps, you know, the Hillary Clintons and so forth. That's very, very true. But they also offer opportunities. Young people are not waiting for the elections to fight. They're not waiting. They're shutting down Trump rallies, and we applaud those. We're for shutting down Trump and Clinton wherever we can. To hell with the elections. But you know, and this is something that we see that's going to continue even after the elections. And we have to continue to moderate and see what happens. That coming out of the RNC, coming out of the DNC, there's a lot we don't know in terms of how this struggle is going to be moving forward. We're very interesting. Some on the left are not interested in what's going to happen with the Bernie Sanders movement. And we feel we don't understand that. I've spoken on panels of different socialist groups who said, well, you know, it's you know, he's not a socialist, so to hell with you know, him and the people that are for him. And we see there's a difference. We distinguish between Sanders, the individual, and the movement, because we want to win over that movement. We want to win them over because they are active, they're in the streets. A lot of them want to be revolutionaries. When that Trump rally that was shut down in Chicago, you know, a few months ago, a lot of those folks were carrying Sanders signs, even though he, you know, disassociated himself from those who were carrying the signs. So this is not a monolithic movement in terms of the Sanders movement. And so we want to win over and help win over the best people out of that movement who want to continue to be active, who want to be revolutionaries beyond the elections. So that's why we're running. We're running to expose the elections, to expose them, and to bring our program and to talk to people and to listen to people and see what they're saying and how we can try to win them over. And I don't know if Erica or Lamont want to say more about that.
Yeah, not to rehash anything that you've already stated, but I think Malcolm said it best. There was a phrase that he used, the ballot or the bullet. The ballot or the bullet. And I think as oppressed people, we've always used every tool at our expense to resist, to fight back, to illuminate, you know, some of these issues and how we can bring about solutions. We saw the Black Panther Party do the same thing. Use the social platform of elections as a way to reach the masses, as a way to continue to travel, as a way to continue to connect people, connect struggles, connect organizations. Is it a perfect necessarily platform? No, it's not. We've discussed some of its weaknesses, right? But it is a tool. And I think, you know, very lastly, a personal testimony, a personal experience was just last month. I'm in Rockford, Illinois, of all places, with Pam and Ramona Africa, who were two of the most anti-establishment revolutionaries that there is in the game. And there was an old elder brother who got up and let us know, yo, you know what? I came to this forum this evening simply because this campaign is the only campaign that I can identify with politically, culturally, and revolutionarily speaking. And it really struck me, that he came simply because we were running for office. And I really realized then that it does matter. It does matter to use his platform. And we're going to keep using it as best we can.
And also, we recognize the fact that, there've been many splits within the communist movement, and especially with, the collapse of the Soviet Union. There's been a lot of splits, amongst the left, and there's nothing new, depending on what period you're talking about. But on the other hand, we feel that it's important to unite where we can unite. We're for socialist unity. This is something that Hugo Chavez put out before he died. He called for the world, in terms of, building socialist unity against imperialism, and especially in light of the environmental crisis, the global crisis of, environmental destruction that was going on. And we support that. We support that now, that we feel that we have more in common than not. And it's very important because the movement is weak. The revolutionary movement in this country is weak. And we recognize that. And there's many reasons for that, which would take a whole other, discussion and panel to do that, and for days to talk about that. But, we feel that that's, we need to put aside whatever differences that we may have, because we're all, for the struggle, and our, we just, for our party, we just feel it's important to put the struggle first before any of organizational needs. And for a lot of the left, that doesn't happen. They put their own needs before the good of the struggle itself. And so this is something that, that we preached, at as many places as possible. And we find that a lot of the left are for this. They're for this. It's a question of how to go about doing it in a very practical way. But I think where it starts is like just talking it out, like just theoretically talking it out. Where can we find common ground? And I have to say, and I'll end with this, that for a lot of the left in this country, the issue of racism and white supremacy, not to say that they're not against it, but how do you prioritizing it is not on, we're not on the same page in terms of prioritizing the struggle against white supremacy and racism and national oppression. That, if you don't understand that, that's the acid test of any, revolutionary organization and movement. Where do you stand? And it doesn't matter if, the leadership, may not be the leadership that we may, have a complete affinity with ideologically, depending on, in terms of leading to the press. But when it comes to fighting and fighting imperialism, because they look for all those weaknesses. They look for the weaknesses. How can we divide and conquer this group and this group, And we put that aside, in terms of defending Syria, defending Iran, defending the North Korea. We may not agree with all their policies, but that's not the point. The point is defending these countries against imperialism in terms of building unity and solidarity, because only the people of those countries, they'll figure out how to struggle against their own governments, but they can't do it when the heel of imperialism is on their necks. They can't do it. So, and that's our job, to demand that the imperialism get out, out and, and stop violating the sovereignty of these countries.